Welcome to another quiet journey into the forgotten corners of history. You've come to the right place if your mind is full and you're searching for a place to rest it, where facts flow softly and the past unfolds not with urgency, but with ease. Here, in this sleepy corner of YouTube, we tell stories the slow way, the boring way, the soothing way. Tonight, we'll ease our way into a question that tickles the modern mind. Why didn't medieval people take baths for months? The question may conjure harsh images, grime, stench, discomfort, but the truth, as always, is far more nuanced and quietly fascinating. Cleanliness, like so many aspects of history, was not so much neglected as it was redefined by the rhythm of the times, shaped by beliefs, resources, and climate. But we won't rush to conclusions. We'll take it slowly. We'll begin by wandering into the streets and homes of the medieval world, drifting into the patterns of daily life. Later, we'll meet the figures who shaped ideas about the body and cleanliness. We'll uncover forgotten practices, rituals, medicines, beliefs, and explore the contrasts between the upper class and the laborer, the monastery and the marketplace. So, settle in. Let your shoulders soften. Breathe in, slowly and deeply. And imagine yourself in a quieter time. A slower world. A world where the fire crackled for warmth, water was carried by hand, and the scent of rosemary might pass for soap. We begin, not in a grand palace or royal chamber, but in the humble home of a medieval villager. Where water is heavy, warmth is precious, and bathing is complicated. Imagine yourself waking up in a small timber-framed house in a quiet English village around the year 1280. The roof above you is thatched with straw. The walls are packed with wattle and daub, and the floor beneath you is hard-packed earth. There is no glass in the windows, just wooden shutters, closed against the night chill. The air is thick with the smell of smoke, not because there's a fire burning brightly, but because the hearth's embers still whisper warmth into the room, and there is no chimney, just a hole in the roof for the smoke to find its way out. Your bed is shared, perhaps with a sibling, or a spouse, or even the younger children. Beds are a communal space, the warmth of bodies treasured against the cold of night. You stretch slowly, not expecting softness. The blanket is rough wool, and the rushes beneath you are dry but uneven, perhaps with a scattering of herbs like lavender or pennyroyal meant to ward off fleas. There is no bath waiting. No sink. No mirror. Your morning doesn't begin with warm water or steam, but with a simple splash from a wooden basin if water is available. The water might have been drawn yesterday from the village well, cold and silty. It's not wasteful to reuse it, wastefulness is a luxury of the future. Your washing is limited. Perhaps just the hands and face, or a quick wipe with a cloth. The concept of scrubbing one's entire body daily is unfamiliar. It would seem odd. Water is a burden to carry, to heat, to use. It must be fetched and boiled over a fire. For most villagers, bathing the entire body is an event, not a habit. Instead, cleanliness is approached differently. You change your linen shift, the long undergarment worn close to the skin, when you can. It absorbs sweat and oils, and its regular changing is the closest thing you have to a daily cleaning routine. These shifts are often rinsed and beaten at the riverbank or washed in communal tubs by the women of the household, scrubbed with ash soap and pounded with paddles. You wear layers, woolen tunics, perhaps dyed with madder or onion skin, belted at the waist. Your outer garments are not often clean but shaken out, brushed, perhaps even smoked over herbs to remove odors. Soap, as we think of it, is rare. What's used is often coarse and made with animal fat and wood ash. The smell is sharp, earthy. Not floral, not sweet. Throughout the day, the work keeps you moving. If you're a man, you might be in the fields, turning soil or tending livestock. If you're a woman, you might be baking, spinning, brewing ale, or preparing herbs. All of it builds a different kind of scent, a living one, shared by everyone around you. And this sameness, this shared rhythm, is important. In your world, everyone smells similarly. No one is comparing notes with scented soaps or floral shampoos. There is no concept of body odor as a social failing. Odors are seasonal, occupational, and largely ignored unless overwhelmingly unpleasant. As the sun climbs, you might pass through the village square. There, you'd find the communal well, perhaps a bakehouse, and the open ditches that carry waste away. It isn't a clean place by modern standards, but there is order. The muck is a known quantity. People avoid stepping where pigs root and chamber pots are emptied. Cleanliness is spatial, not chemical. You stay clean by staying out of filth. In the church, there is water for holy purposes, blessed water for dipping fingers, or for ritual cleansing, but this is symbolic more than sanitary. The soul is washed, not the skin. By evening, when the air grows damp and cool again, there is a small bowl for another rinse, hands and face, perhaps feet if they're sore or cracked. The rest remains untouched. To strip fully and wash the entire body would be unusual, uncomfortable, even potentially dangerous. Because here's where belief plays a part. In this time, many people believe that opening the pores through heat and scrubbing makes the body vulnerable. Bad air, miasma, is thought to be the cause of illness. If your skin is scrubbed raw or your body is flushed with warmth, it is more open to disease. This isn't a superstition, it's a medical theory, supported by the best minds of the age. Cleanliness must be balanced with safety. And so, full baths are rare. Reserved for special occasions. Perhaps once a season. Perhaps during holy festivals, or in preparation for marriage. When it does happen, the process is laborious. Water must be carried by the bucket. The tub must be filled, warmed, guarded. Soap may be used, or not. Herbs might be added, sage, lavender, chamomile, not just for scent but for health, for spiritual protection. By now, the fire is dimming. The last light of the sky filters in through cracks in the shutters. Your body is tired, but the grime you carry is not seen as shameful. It's a badge of labor, of contribution, of survival. And so, you lie back once more, into those same shared blankets, warmed not by cleanliness, but by the bodies beside you. Your skin is unwashed, your linens are worn, but your place in the rhythm of medieval life is clear and unquestioned. Tomorrow, the same tasks await. The same hands and the same water basin. And the same quiet understanding that, in this world, a bath is not a routine, it is a rare event. Imagine yourself in a stone chamber lit by oil lamps. The year is somewhere in the early 2nd century CE, and you are in the bustling city of Pergamon, in Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey. Here, in the calm of an academic garden, a man bends over a scroll, scribbling down his latest observations on the human body. He is Galen of Pergamon, physician, philosopher, and prolific writer. What he sets down tonight, in careful Greek prose, will travel far beyond the reaches of the Roman Empire. It will echo in the lecture halls of Paris and Bologna. It will shape medical thought for over a millennium. And yes, it will have a lot to do with why medieval people thought bathing was dangerous. Galen was not a medieval man, of course. But his ideas, filtered and reinterpreted, were central to medieval medicine. To understand why people feared warm baths, we must first understand the world Galen saw. He was born in 129 CE, during the reign of Emperor Hadrian. His father, Nikon, was an architect and a philosopher, and he ensured young Galen received a broad and rigorous education, geometry, logic, astronomy, and above all, medicine. Galen studied at the famous healing center at Asclepion, and later traveled through the Eastern Roman world, observing surgeries, animal dissections, and human ailments with obsessive detail. At the heart of Galen's work was the theory of the four humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. These weren't just substances, they were the very essence of health and personality. A person with an excess of black bile, for example, might be melancholic. Too much blood? Sanguine and energetic. Health was about balance, not sterilization. The body was a system of flows, warmth, and moisture. And everything that entered or exited it, food, drink, sweat, blood, was part of maintaining that delicate harmony. In Galen's worldview, bathing was not inherently bad. In fact, under certain conditions, it was healthy. He recommended warm baths to soothe the muscles, cold baths to invigorate the spirit. But he was deeply concerned with the timing, temperature, and context of any such practice. Bathe too often, and you risk opening your pores, disturbing your internal balance, or exposing yourself to harmful air. And so, Galen's writings were filled with conditional advice: if the air is damp, avoid heat; if your humors are unbalanced, don't bathe; if you are recovering from illness, avoid sudden changes in temperature. These guidelines, subtle and context-driven in the original Greek, would later be translated, often clumsily, into Latin, Arabic, and eventually medieval vernaculars. Now, imagine these ideas trickling down the centuries. As the Western Roman Empire declined, Galen's medical authority didn't fade, it grew. His texts, preserved in Byzantium and later translated by Islamic scholars like Avicenna, formed the foundation of medieval medical knowledge. Universities in the 12th and 13th centuries revered him as an unquestionable authority. His descriptions of humors, pores, vapors, and internal heat became gospel. In monasteries and medical schools across Europe, students recited Galenic doctrine. They learned that a person's health could be disrupted by bad airs, that the skin was porous and vulnerable, and that excessive bathing, especially in warm water, could upset the balance of humors. A warm bath might feel good, yes, but it was also seen as a medical risk. You might be wondering, what happened to the Roman bathhouses? After all, ancient Rome was known for its elaborate bathing culture. Aqueducts supplied water to vast thermae, public baths with heated floors, marble pools, and social rituals built around cleanliness. But those baths, too, were not purely about hygiene. They were about status, relaxation, even politics. By the early medieval period, these Roman structures were crumbling. The engineering that had once fed them, stone pipes, subterranean boilers, cisterns, was lost or left to decay. Without maintenance, they fell silent. And in the Christian West, suspicion of Roman luxury grew. Public nudity, shared baths, and the sensual pleasures of soaking in heat became associated with pagan excess. The moral tone of the age shifted. Cleanliness became more about spiritual purity than physical freshness. But it was Galen, not just the Church, who gave this suspicion scientific weight. By the 13th century, learned physicians advised against too much bathing. They echoed Galenic warnings about open pores and the dangers of sudden shifts in bodily temperature. They believed that after a bath, one was vulnerable to the air, especially during outbreaks of plague, when the corrupted air was thought to seep into the skin and cause death. Better, they reasoned, to remain covered, closed, protected. In treatises like the Regimen Sanitatis Salernitanum, a widely used medieval medical text, readers were advised to wash moderately. A clean face and hands, yes, but a full bath? Only when necessary. And even then, take precautions. Don't bathe on a full stomach. Don't bathe too early or too late. Add herbs to purify the water. Rub the body with cloths afterward to seal the pores. And so, the fear of bathing grew, not from ignorance, but from caution. It wasn't that people didn't care about cleanliness. They did. They believed in dry hygiene, rubbing the skin with cloths, changing linens, perfuming the body with oils and herbs. But full immersion in water? That was a medical decision. A risky one. This legacy of Galen's careful, cautious approach to bodily balance lasted well into the 17th century. Even as scientific revolutions began to question humoral theory, the cultural resistance to bathing persisted. Kings were crowned in clothes they had worn for weeks. Queens gave birth surrounded by aromatic herbs rather than soap and water. Physicians still warned that a hot bath could weaken the constitution or even cause madness. It is curious, isn't it? That one man, writing by lamplight nearly 2,000 years ago, could shape how millions of people understood their bodies. Galen didn't say never bathe. He didn't preach filth. He simply asked for caution, for context, for balance. But in a world where translation was slow and literacy limited, those nuanced views hardened into doctrine. Baths became threats. Cleanliness, a risk. And so, the rhythm of medieval life continued, not because of laziness, but because of learned fear. The kind passed down through parchment and memory. The kind shaped by a physician long gone, whose ghost still whispered warnings through the pages of books. As you rest now, and let this knowledge settle, consider how fragile our understanding of health can be. How much it depends not just on science, but on culture, language, and belief. In the medieval world, to remain unwashed was not to be uncivilized, it was, in many cases, to be cautious, thoughtful, even wise. The world of the Middle Ages was not entirely unwashed. To the sleepy eye of archaeology, time leaves clues in sediment and stone, in drainage grooves and soot-blackened tiles. Beneath the surface of our modern cities lie the quiet remnants of an older way of life, a hidden culture of bathing that once flourished even as fears of illness and open pores grew. Let us begin, gently, with the bathhouse. Imagine yourself in a quiet street of 13th century Paris. It's dusk. A soft fog hangs in the air, curling along the edges of the Seine. Stone buildings line the way, their wooden signs swaying gently above doorways. One such sign bears a carved bowl of steaming water. You've arrived at a public bathhouse. Despite everything we've heard of dirt, of avoidance, of caution, there were still places where people gathered to bathe. And in many parts of Europe, particularly in cities, these establishments weren't hidden away. They were ordinary features of urban life. In medieval England, they were called stews, a term also used for fish ponds but later co-opted to describe bathhouses. In German-speaking lands, they were known as Badstuben, literally, bathing rooms. These were warm, steamy structures, often timber-built and lined with wooden planks. Heated water was carried in, or pools were warmed directly by fire beneath stone chambers. Steam filled the air. Herbs were added to the water, sage, chamomile, rose petals, both for health and fragrance. Inside, there might be separate areas for men and women, or not. Rules varied. In some places, bathhouses became places not just for washing but for dining, drinking, even romantic encounters. This ambiguity eventually led to their decline, especially as the church grew concerned about morality and public nudity. But for several centuries, they were central to urban life. Archaeological traces of these bathhouses are surprisingly common. In London, excavations near Cheapside uncovered drains and heating systems that likely belonged to stews operating in the 12th and 13th centuries. In cities like Bath, named, fittingly, after Roman spas, medieval structures were built over earlier Roman baths, repurposing ancient springs. These places were not just tolerated, they were often licensed, taxed, and regulated. But public baths were not always about cleanliness. Sometimes they were about healing. Let's move gently now to the spa towns. Throughout Europe, certain natural springs were believed to possess curative powers. Some were hot, others rich in minerals, and many had been venerated since ancient times. The Romans had visited them for centuries, and the medieval world inherited this reverence. In the Czech lands, the town of Karlovy Vary grew around a hot spring said to cure liver ailments. In Hungary, thermal baths bubbled beneath what is now Budapest. In Germany, Aachen was famous for its hot waters, attracting emperors and pilgrims alike. These spa towns offered more than just relief, they offered ritual. People didn't just soak. They prayed. They fasted. They bathed in sequences, first hot, then cool. They drank the mineral water, believing it could cleanse them from within. Sometimes, entire medical regimens were built around these visits. Physicians prescribed bathing cures, complete with detailed instructions on temperature, duration, and frequency. It was here, in these mineral-rich waters, that medieval bathing touched the mystical. For many, water was more than just a physical element, it was sacred. In Ireland, holy wells dotted the landscape, often dedicated to saints and associated with healing. Pilgrims came to them barefoot, carrying offerings, dipping cloths into the spring to wrap around injuries. Archaeologists have found coins, pins, and small votive objects left in these wells, hidden beneath centuries of peat and soil. At Glastonbury, at Lourdes, at hundreds of lesser-known springs, water became a bridge between the earthly and the divine. To bathe in such waters was not merely hygienic, it was spiritual. It was a cleansing of the soul, the body, and the unseen forces that moved between them. Even monasteries, often thought of as austere places, sometimes included baths. The rule of Saint Benedict, which guided monastic life, allowed for bathing when health required it. Some monastic infirmaries had well-designed bathing chambers, with heated floors and flowing water. These were used for the elderly, the sick, and occasionally the entire community on feast days. One such example lies in the ruins of the Abbey of Cluny in France. There, archaeologists uncovered a sophisticated drainage system and heating infrastructure, suggesting that monks, far from avoiding cleanliness, engaged with it in structured, ritual ways. Yet these practices remained selective. They did not translate into daily bathing for the average person. The labor involved, the cost of firewood, the scarcity of clean water, all made regular washing impractical. But the bathhouse, the sacred spring, and the monastic infirmary were spaces where cleanliness could flourish, if briefly. Let's pause now at one final location, uncovered only recently. In the German town of Regensburg, a 12th-century bathhouse was discovered beneath a residential block. Its floors were laid in soot, its walls bore traces of soot-streaked plaster, stained by years of steam. Carved stones suggested a firebox used to heat the chamber. In one corner, archaeologists found a stone basin, cracked but intact. Inside were fragments of dried herbs, charred wood, and the faint scent of something once floral, now lost to time. It is these traces that tell the quiet truth. People did bathe. Just not often. Just not as we do. The act was not forgotten, merely transformed. It became occasional, ceremonial, practical when it needed to be. To bathe in the Middle Ages was to engage with fire and water, with belief and caution. It was to measure risk and benefit, to honor tradition, and to use prek. Imagine, if you will, a noblewoman rising in her chambers at the court of Burgundy in the 15th century. Her room is vast and cold, the stone walls softened by hanging tapestries that ripple slightly with the breeze from a narrow, glassless window. The air is scented not with soap or steam, but with dried rose petals, lavender, and powdered iris root sprinkled across the rushes on the floor. She does not bathe, not today, and not yesterday either. Yet she is, by the standards of her world, clean. Cleanliness among the medieval elite was not defined by immersion in water, but by layers of ritual, luxury, and fragrance. It was a form of curated hygiene, often focused on appearances and aroma rather than modern microbial concerns. Let's begin with her morning routine. A servant enters carrying a ewer of warmed water and a shallow silver basin. The water is lightly scented, perhaps with rosemary, or infused with marjoram or rose oil. The noblewoman sits patiently as her hands are gently wiped with a soft linen cloth. Her face is dabbed with a sponge. Her teeth may be wiped with a rough cloth dipped in wine or vinegar, strong enough to kill odors, though not exactly freshening by modern standards. Her hair is brushed. Oils are applied. If she's wealthy enough, she may own combs made of ivory or horn, or even imported tortoiseshell, delicate tools used not just to detangle, but to remove lice and eggs, a common concern among all classes. Still, no bath. Because bathing, even for the rich, was complicated. In royal courts or noble estates, there may have been access to large wooden tubs lined with cloth. These were often filled in the lady's chamber, with water carried up laboriously by servants, bucket by bucket, heated over hearths and carefully poured to the right temperature. Bathing, when it happened, was a production. In some cases, the tubs were surrounded by curtains or screens for privacy. Bathing could be luxurious, scented water, rose petals, relaxing music, even a goblet of wine nearby. There were perfumed oils to rub into the skin afterward, and soft cloths to dry off. But all of this was the exception, not the rule. We know from court records and household manuals that such baths were often reserved for occasions, illness, after childbirth, before marriage, or in preparation for religious festivals. Even Queen Isabella of Castile reportedly bathed only twice in her life, once on her wedding day, and once before the birth of her first child. Whether this is legend or exaggeration is hard to say. But the point remains, the upper classes bathed less frequently than we might imagine. Instead, they layered cleanliness in other ways. Linen, for example, was considered critical to staying clean. The wealthy owned multiple undergarments, often made from fine, breathable linen. These were worn close to the skin and changed often, sometimes daily. The idea was that linen would absorb sweat and dirt, and could then be washed, removing impurities by proxy. This logic was echoed by the philosopher Erasmus in the 16th century, who noted that changing shirts is almost as good as washing the body. Laundering linen was a massive operation. Noble households employed washerwomen, soap makers, and even dedicated water fetchers. Fine linens were scrubbed with ashes and soap root, boiled in copper pots, beaten, and hung to dry in gardens or courtyards. A noble's cleanliness, then, often depended on the quiet, endless labor of dozens of others. Then came powders and perfumes. Scent was status. The elite could afford perfumes imported from the Middle East, ambergris, musk, sandalwood, and these were used to mask the body's natural odors. Powdered herbs and crushed flowers were rubbed into the skin or sewn into sachets worn beneath the clothes. Pomanders, small, ornate balls filled with aromatic resins, were worn on belts or necklaces to keep bad smells at bay. Some carried scented gloves or handkerchiefs to press to the nose in public spaces. Others used vinegar-soaked sponges, believing the sharp scent could protect them from miasma, or corrupted air, thought to carry disease. And then there were cleansing pastes. Rather than soap, which was harsh and drying, noble women often used soft pastes made from flour, honey, eggs, or ground almonds to clean their hands and faces. These pastes were smeared on, allowed to sit, and then wiped away with cloths. The goal was not to scrub, but to soften and refresh. Hair posed another challenge. Without shampoo, oil and sweat built up quickly, so hair was rarely washed with water. Instead, it was dusted with scented powders, rice flour, starch, or crushed herbs, which absorbed oils and left the hair lightly fragranced. These powders could then be brushed out, taking the dirt with them. One can see the logic. Water was messy, scarce, and dangerous. But cloth, oil, and scent could be controlled. Even in matters of illness, the elite approached bathing cautiously. Royal physicians might prescribe sweating instead, wrapping the patient in furs or placing them in heated chambers to purge bad humors. A bath, if ordered, was carefully supervised, timed, measured, and followed by rest and wine. It's worth noting that despite their resources, the elite were not necessarily cleaner than the poor. In fact, they sometimes bathed less, relying on clothing, servants, and strong perfumes to mask what water could not reach. While a peasant might bathe once a month in a river during summer, a noble might avoid full immersion for a year, perhaps more. Their homes were also not particularly sanitary. Chamber pots were emptied out of windows. Animals roamed freely. Rats were common. The wealthier you were, the more furs and heavy fabrics filled your home, and the more likely those materials were to harbor fleas, lice, and other pests. And yet, within their world, they were paragons of cleanliness. Because cleanliness, in the Middle Ages, was deeply tied to rank. It wasn't about killing germs, it was about order, scent, fabric, and ritual. A noble woman, freshly powdered, dressed in perfumed layers, and surrounded by servants with scented cloths, was considered clean, even if her skin had not touched water in weeks. In royal courts, etiquette manuals emphasized manners above hygiene: don't scratch in public, don't spit on the floor, don't blow your nose into your hand. Cleanliness was performative, about control and dignity. A fragrant courtier was admired not for their hygiene, but for their discipline. Let's not forget the symbolic bath. Occasionally, the act of bathing was used for effect. Knights before knighthood were bathed in a ritual of purification. Queens before marriage underwent ceremonial baths, often in full view of witnesses. These baths were staged, scripted, meaningful. They marked transformation, not sanitation. And so, as you drift further into stillness, picture a noble chamber by candlelight. Picture the silence of a basin being filled, the slow brushing of perfumed powder into hair, the quiet scraping of a linen cloth against skin. This was cleanliness. Slow. Subtle. Ceremonial. Perhaps not by our standards, but by theirs, it was enough. Imagine yourself once more in a small village, perhaps in the foothills of medieval Bohemia, or deep in the forested valleys of 14th century France. The morning fog curls low over the thatched rooftops, and dew hangs heavy on the woven fences. Chickens scratch near the doorsteps. A dog stretches in the sun. Water is nearby, but not always close. Perhaps there is a well in the village center, or a slow-moving stream just beyond the fields. For the villagers, water is life, but it is also labor. It must be fetched, lifted, carried, poured. There are no taps. No plumbing. Every drop used for cooking, cleaning, or drinking requires effort. The idea of wasting water on a bath? Rarely considered. Let's step into the home of a weaver and his family. Their cottage is small, one main room, maybe a loft for sleeping. A central hearth burns low. The floor is made of compacted earth, sometimes strewn with dried herbs like meadowsweet or mint, not for decoration, but to keep pests and odors at bay. Inside, a wooden bucket sits near the hearth. It holds water drawn the day before. Perhaps some is reserved for boiling porridge or steeping nettles for tea. A little more for rinsing hands or wiping a child's face. But a full-body wash? That would take several buckets, heated over hours, poured into a tub that may not even exist. And so, like most of their neighbors, the family does what's practical. They wash their hands and face with cloths. They scrub their feet after long days in the fields. In summer, children might splash in the stream, playfully, instinctively. But not as a formal bath. Clothes are brushed clean, shaken out, beaten with sticks. Undergarments, when available, are rinsed and hung to dry. But the body itself, especially the skin beneath layers of wool and linen, remains untouched by water for long stretches of time. It's not simply neglect. It is a philosophy of moderation, shaped by centuries of belief. Many rural people held deep-rooted suspicions about full immersion. To open one's pores with heat and then walk into the wind was, to them, dangerous. Sickness could seep in. There were tales of strong men who took warm baths and fell ill days later, struck with fever, coughing, or weakness. These weren't mere coincidences in their minds, they were warnings. Superstitions also played a role. Some villagers believed that water, especially water at night, could invite spirits. The boundaries between the physical world and the spirit realm were believed to be thin, particularly near natural springs, rivers, and wells. These places were often considered sacred, even magical, and not to be trifled with for something as casual as washing. You might rinse your hands there. You might take a cup of water home. But to disrobe and enter the spring? That was something else entirely. In Ireland and Scotland, holy wells were common, and while they were visited for healing, they were also treated with reverence. Rituals included offerings, prayers, even specific days when the well should or shouldn't be approached. Bathing in these sites, while occasionally prescribed, was done with serious caution and always with a spiritual intention. In rural Germany and parts of Eastern Europe, stories persisted about water spirits, the Nixie or Vodnik, creatures said to live beneath the water's surface. Children were warned not to linger near lakes or bathe in the river after sunset, lest they be pulled under. These tales weren't just for amusement. They shaped behavior. They added yet another reason why a full bath, especially outside the home, was not taken lightly. Still, bathing wasn't entirely absent. In the warmest months, some peasants did bathe, especially if they lived near a clean, slow-moving stream. These washes were practical, done in underclothes or nude, often after a long day of work when sweat and soil clung thick to the skin. But there was no ritual to it. No soap. Just a quick rinse, a scrub with hands or a rough cloth, and then drying in the sun. Soap, if it existed in the home, was a hard, coarse substance, often homemade, formed by boiling animal fat with ashes. It was used sparingly, usually for laundry. The idea of using it on the skin was known, but not often practiced. It could dry the skin, sting the eyes, and strip away what little protection the body had. Instead, the peasants relied on their clothes. Just like the elite, they wore linen shifts against their skin, basic, hand-stitched garments that soaked up sweat and dirt. These were easier to wash than the heavier outer garments, and families often rotated through a small number of shifts, washing them every week or two if water allowed. In winter, bathing became even rarer. The cold made it impractical. Heating enough water for a full wash was nearly impossible for a family barely surviving the season. The fear of illness grew stronger, and the body was wrapped in layers rather than stripped for washing. There were, of course, exceptions. Some villages had communal bathing days, especially before religious festivals. In parts of Scandinavia and the Slavic world, saunas and steam baths were used, small wooden rooms where people gathered to sweat out impurities. These spaces, known as banya in Russia or sauna in Finland, served both hygienic and social purposes. People sat together in the steam, beat themselves with birch branches to stimulate the skin, and then cooled off outdoors. But even here, full immersion in water might not follow. Steam was seen as safer, more effective. In some cases, midwives or folk healers prescribed herbal baths for specific ailments, fever, infection, childbirth. These involved steeping bundles of thyme, yarrow, or calendula in hot water, pouring the infusion into a wooden tub, and carefully lowering the patient in. These baths were healing, not routine. It's important to remember that despite their limited resources, rural people had an understanding of clean and unclean. They knew that feces, spoiled food, and rot caused illness. They tried to separate their waste areas from their cooking. They kept livestock outdoors when possible. They scoured pots, scraped knives, rinsed bowls. But the body was another matter. Covered, protected, left alone unless necessary. Cleanliness was often external, social. If you looked neat, if your clothes were brushed, if your hair was tied back and your feet weren't caked in mud, you were clean enough. And so, for the average villager, the months passed without a bath. Life moved with the seasons, planting, harvesting, mending, mourning. There was little time for ritual, and even less for water. The smell of smoke in the hair, the tang of sweat on the collar, the touch of linen roughened by repeated rinsing in river water, all these were simply part of being human. Not shameful. Not ignored. Just accepted. Imagine the wind blowing across the stone streets of a mid-14th century city, Florence, perhaps. The scent of incense clings to the corners of chapels, bells toll for the dying, and heavy carts creak along alleys as they carry the dead toward burial grounds just outside the city walls. It is the year 1348. And the Black Death has arrived. At this moment in history, personal cleanliness, once a small virtue, perhaps practiced in private or celebrated in bathhouses, now becomes something dangerous. Not just unnecessary, but feared. Let us take a gentle walk into the minds of those who lived through this time. What did they believe was causing the plague? How did that shape their feelings about water, steam, and open pores? The prevailing theory of disease at the time was the miasma theory. According to this belief, illness spread through bad air, or noxious vapors that emanated from decaying matter. If you could smell rot, filth, or anything unclean, it meant your body was being exposed to invisible poisons. These vapors were said to enter the body through the mouth, nose, and even the pores of the skin. Now consider the practice of bathing, particularly hot baths. When a person entered a steamy bathhouse or soaked in warm water at home, it was understood, correctly, that the heat opened the pores. But here's where logic took a fearful turn. With open pores, many believed, the body became vulnerable. It could no longer protect itself from those deadly vapors drifting through the streets. Instead, they thought the skin became like an open gate, welcoming disease in. So what did people do? They avoided washing. During times of plague, even the simplest acts of hygiene were abandoned by many. Bathhouses closed their doors, sometimes by order of the authorities, other times out of fear among the owners and workers themselves. A once popular social and medicinal space now became a suspected death trap. Doctors advised the population to stay dry, to avoid water, to seal the body by rubbing it with oils, fats, and even wax. This would, they thought, block the pores from inhaling deadly miasmas. Imagine, for a moment, the quiet horror of those days. In large cities like London or Paris, families huddled inside, windows shuttered against the outside air. They clutched pomanders, small balls filled with herbs and perfumes, to ward off the smell of death. Some carried vinegar-soaked cloths to hold over their faces. Others lit fires in their rooms, hoping the smoke would push back the invisible threat. Clothes went unwashed. Bedding was rarely changed. Water was used only for drinking and cooking, and the body was allowed to go unbathed for months, even years. In Florence, there are records of nobles rubbing their skin with powders made from crushed roses, nutmeg, and cloves, not to smell pleasant, but to create a kind of barrier against the plague. Others used a paste made of lead and vinegar. Wealthier citizens might pay physicians to prepare bespoke perfumes and ointments, which they believed could seal the skin. Among the common people, the situation was grimmer still. Imagine a family in a crowded tenement house in London's Southwark district. A mother cares for her children, some of whom are coughing. Outside, a bell sounds, "Bring out your dead." The mother has no fresh water. The river nearby is foul. She dares not use the communal bathhouse. So she dabs the children's faces with vinegar, burns dried lavender on the hearth, and pulls the blankets tighter. There will be no baths this month. Perhaps not until the frost returns. This fear of bathing extended beyond the plague years. Even in the centuries that followed, many doctors continued to warn against the dangers of washing during outbreaks of cholera, typhus, and influenza. The belief persisted: clean skin with open pores was a risk. Let's step forward to the 17th century now, to the court of Louis XIV in France. Versailles dazzles with gold and mirrors, but beneath the surface, hygiene is complicated. Louis himself was known to fear bathing. He reportedly took only a handful of full-body baths in his entire life. And he was not alone in this. At court, men and women masked their unwashed bodies with elaborate perfumes, scented gloves, and powdered wigs. It was said that cleanliness came not from bathing, but from changing clothes. Layers of linen undershirts were swapped out and washed more frequently than the body itself. In this way, a person could remain clean without ever touching water. Of course, there were still bathers. There were still rebels, those who believed in the restorative power of water, in herbal baths, in simple washing. Monks in some monasteries maintained strict rituals of bathing before prayer. Midwives still recommended postpartum baths for women. And in places like Scandinavia and Russia, steam baths remained popular, though even there, during epidemics, usage dropped. Let us now pause in Prague, in the year 1610. A physician writes in his journal about the growing fear among his patients. They have stopped bathing. Some refuse even to wash their hands. A few families are rubbing themselves with garlic and onion juice. One noblewoman has smeared her skin with bear fat and won't let the servants come near. He writes, they fear water more than death itself. Picture yourself walking through the gilded corridors of Versailles in the late 1600s. The floors glisten, the chandeliers sparkle, and richly dressed courtiers move about with practiced grace. But beneath the layers of brocade and velvet lies a different story. This was the age of elegance, a time when outward appearance reigned supreme. And yet, even in these opulent palaces, bathing remained uncommon, sometimes even discouraged. Take King Louis XIV of France, often known as the Sun King. He ruled for over 70 years and became the symbol of refined court life. But despite his enormous palace, with its hundreds of rooms and expansive gardens, Louis reportedly took very few baths in his entire life. One account claims he bathed only twice, each time under medical instruction. Why? Because bathing, even in this age of beauty, was still seen as dangerous to the body. The old fears about water opening the pores and allowing disease to enter still held sway. Even the finest doctors of the court clung to the belief that water could weaken the constitution or upset the body's balance of humors. So what did aristocrats do instead? They perfumed. Scent became the primary method of cleansing. Perfume wasn't merely for allure, it was medicine, protection, and status all at once. Aristocrats wore scented gloves, carried perfumed handkerchiefs, and dabbed aromatic oils on their bodies instead of soap and water. Powder also played a central role in the hygiene of this time. Both men and women applied layers of white face powder, often made from dangerous ingredients like lead or arsenic. Wigs were dusted with powder laced with floral oils or spices. Clothing, too, was perfumed and powdered. But powder didn't only beautify, it masked the truth. The face, once oily or sweaty, now appeared pale and composed. The hair, unwashed for weeks, looked freshly styled thanks to flour and fragrance. The body, never bathed, gave off the scent of violets or musk. This was not cleanliness as we know it, but rather an elaborate performance, a carefully maintained illusion. Even furniture participated in the deception. Chairs at court were often shallow and upholstered with waxed fabrics. Rooms were sprinkled with lavender or lined with herbs. Potpourri-filled bowls sat in every chamber. And for a time, small oranges or pomanders were carried or worn on belts, designed to fight both bad odors and bad air. Let's wander now into the private chambers of a duchess in 18th century Vienna. Her day begins not with a bath, but with a toilette, a morning ritual of cleansing without water. A maid helps her remove her linen shift, which has absorbed sweat overnight. The duchess stands in front of a mirror, and with gentle strokes, the maid applies rose water to the skin, not to clean, but to refresh. Next comes the dry wash. Powder is rubbed under the arms and between the thighs. The feet are dusted with orris root. A scented pomade is brushed into her wig, and a fine mist of perfume settles over her shoulders. By the end, the duchess looks pristine. But her skin has not touched soap or warm water in weeks. This ritual, lengthy and precise, was considered healthier and more refined than bathing. And it was far more fashionable. Clothes, not water, carried the burden of cleanliness. The wealthy owned dozens, even hundreds, of linen undergarments. These were changed frequently and laundered with care. The body remained untouched, but the linen was washed, creating the impression of cleanliness. In fact, a common phrase during this time was, "Linen is half the bath." Let's pause to consider this. If one changed their shirt every morning and powdered their face with white lead each evening, if they perfumed their hair with crushed flowers and rubbed their skin with vinegar or rose oil, could they be said to be clean? In this age, the answer was yes. Now, while Versailles shimmered in the sunlight, not all homes of the elite were so bright. In the city homes of Paris, Florence, or Madrid, many nobles lived in stone mansions with no plumbing. Chamber pots were emptied into the street. Toilets were basic and far from private. Even washing the hands required effort. Water had to be fetched, warmed, poured, and carefully disposed of. Many wealthy families hired servants specifically to carry out these small rituals: foot washing maids, toilet attendants, and perfume stewards. Each played a role in preserving the image of elegance, even if true cleanliness was never achieved. Interestingly, in this age of powder and perfume, the art of bathing didn't disappear entirely. In some corners of Europe, private bathtubs remained. These were often barrel-shaped or copper-lined, placed near a hearth and filled by hand. A noble might soak once every season, spring, perhaps, to mark a new beginning. But regular bathing remained rare. When people did bathe, it was often for medicinal reasons. Herbal baths were prescribed to treat rashes or melancholy. Sulfur springs were visited to ease joint pain. But these were exceptions, not habits. Now let us shift briefly to Russia and Scandinavia. Here, a different tradition held on. The banya and sauna remained popular, even among the upper classes. Steam, sweat, and then icy plunges, these were accepted forms of cleansing. And in some ways, they represented a contradiction to the rest of Europe. For in these lands, bathing was seen not as a risk, but as a path to strength and clarity. Still, even there, during times of epidemic or in colder months, washing less was considered wise. Let us return to France one final time, to the Petit Trianon, where Marie Antoinette held her private gatherings. Though she bathed more frequently than most, her baths were more for relaxation than sanitation. Her tub was lined with soft cloth, filled with milk or herbal water, and surrounded by fresh flowers. The room would be perfumed, and music played nearby. After her soak, she would be dried by attendants, her skin powdered, and her gowns layered over again. It was less about hygiene, and more about theatre. A performance of luxury, femininity, and grace. So when we think of this age, let us not imagine people as unclean by accident. Their cleanliness was a carefully crafted illusion. It was about appearance, ritual, and scent, not soap, scrubbing, or showers. They lived in a world where water could harm you, where bathing might open your soul to death. So they built a society around avoidance, elegant, scented, and layered. And in doing so, they created one of history's most fascinating paradoxes, a time of exquisite beauty, built upon a fear of bathing. The wind bites as you cross a village green in 14th century England. Smoke curls from thatched rooftops. A woman bends by a stream, rubbing fabric against a flat stone. Chickens cluck nearby. There are no perfumed gloves or ivory combs here, yet cleanliness still holds a place in the rhythm of daily life. Among the working classes of Europe, hygiene was not a luxury, it was a matter of practicality, survival, and seasonal rhythm. While they lacked marble baths and scented oils, their connection to nature, water, and manual labor created a different kind of cleanliness, more tactile, more immediate. Let us begin with the basics, the peasant's morning. In most rural communities, the day started before dawn. The first act wasn't washing, but tending to animals or stoking a fire. Yet even so, people often splashed water on their face and hands. If a stream or well was nearby, this might be cold spring water scooped from a bucket. In winter, water had to be broken from ice or warmed over the fire. Soap was rare, but not absent. Many villagers made their own, using animal fat, tallow, and wood ash to produce lye soap. This rough, grayish substance could sting the skin and dry the hands, but it worked. It was used to scrub clothes, dishes, tools, and sometimes the body, though sparingly. In towns and cities, communal wash houses or public fountains served as the center of cleansing. Women gathered to wash laundry, and occasionally, themselves. Children splashed in basins. Water wasn't clean by modern standards, but it was vital. Shared space meant shared routines, and sometimes shared lice or disease. Bathing the body, for most of the working class, was not a daily event. Weekly or seasonal washing was more common. A common method was the basin bath. A wooden tub, usually circular, would be filled with heated water, if available. Family members would take turns, often starting with the eldest or most respected. Soap, if used, would be minimal. Herbal infusions of rosemary, chamomile, or thyme might be added when available, both for scent and medicinal value. Clothing played a key role in managing hygiene. While noble classes had endless wardrobes, the poor owned very few garments, often just 2 or 3 shifts or tunics. These were rotated, patched, and scrubbed hard. Linen was valued for its ability to absorb sweat and protect outer garments. Much like the nobles, the lower classes saw clean linen as a sign of cleanliness, even if the body beneath wasn't freshly scrubbed. Laundering was laborious. Clothes were boiled, scrubbed, rinsed, and laid out to dry in fields or hung near fires. Women bore the brunt of this work, often bending over wash tubs for hours, their skin reddened by lye and cold water. In some regions, communal rivers or streams were key sites for washing. Not only clothes, but feet and hands were cleansed there. However, this water was also used for drinking and waste, creating an uncomfortable balance between necessity and risk. Toilet practices among the poor were rudimentary. In the countryside, latrines were simple pits dug near homes, often shared by multiple families. In towns, cesspits were more common, underground containers into which waste was dumped. These had to be emptied regularly by men known as gong farmers, a foul but necessary job. Without toilet paper, people used whatever was available: straw, moss, rags, or even smooth stones. Despite these humble conditions, the idea of being clean held strong social and religious importance. On Sundays and holy days, peasants often tried to present themselves as tidy, washing hands and faces, brushing hair, and wearing their best clothes, however modest. In monasteries and convents, even among the poor, ritual washing was enforced. Monks and nuns washed their hands before prayers and meals. Cleanliness here was a spiritual act, reflecting inner purity. Let's visit a medieval bathhouse in a small German village. You might be surprised to find that even poor towns had them. Bathhouses, often built by rivers, were heated by stoves and offered large communal tubs. Men and women sometimes bathed together, though this varied by region and time period. These bathhouses weren't free, but they were affordable enough for seasonal use. Bathers would strip, soak, and scrub. Attendants offered towels. In some cases, bathing was combined with drinking beer or enjoying stew, turning cleanliness into community and celebration. But the Black Death and later religious reforms brought changes. Fear of disease led many to abandon public bathhouses. Skin was thought to be vulnerable after washing, and modesty became more important. As time moved into the Protestant Reformation, bodily cleanliness was no longer seen as a priority. Spiritual cleanliness took precedence. Still, the lower classes adapted. In some areas, sweat baths, similar to Native American sweat lodges, were used. A small hut would be heated with stones, and villagers would sit and sweat, then wash with cold water or snow. Herbs continued to play a role in hygiene. Lavender, mint, and wormwood were placed in bedding or worn in pouches to deter lice and fleas. Vinegar washes were used to fight odor. Simple oils, like olive or animal fat, were rubbed into skin to protect against wind and dirt. Let us now peek into the home of a poor washerwoman in 1700s France. She rises before dawn, kneels beside a wooden washtub, and begins boiling water with ash soap. Her hands are raw, nails broken. She scrubs linen with a paddle, wrings it out, and hauls it to the riverbank for rinsing. This woman may wash others more than she washes herself. Later, she soaks her feet in warm water, scrubs them with salt, and changes her shift. She brushes her hair with a bone comb and smears lard on her cracked hands. There is no powder, no perfume, only effort. And that effort is its own form of dignity. Even among the poor, cleanliness had layers. There was Sunday clean, market clean, and funeral clean. Each demanded a certain standard, reflected not in scented lotions or silk, but in neatness, composure, and effort. As industrialization arrived in the 1800s, things began to shift. New soaps, factory-made, became cheaper. Cities built sewers and public fountains. School children were taught to wash. Posters promoted hygiene. But that, dear listener, is a story for another night. For now, let us rest here, among the wooden tubs and smoky cottages, the scrubbed hands and frost-bitten faces. Here, where cleanliness was not glamorous, but gritty, earnest, and deeply human. Imagine stepping into a dimly lit stone chapel, the scent of incense hanging in the air. A font of cool, still water rests near the door. Before entering, a worshipper dips their fingers, tracing a cross on their brow. In this small act, water becomes more than water. It becomes a bridge between the body and the divine. Throughout history, across continents and creeds, the act of washing has held spiritual meaning. Cleanliness was not just about hygiene, it was often about purity of soul, a preparation for the sacred, a transformation of the self. Let us begin with ancient Egypt, where priests in temples like Karnak or Luxor washed themselves 4 times a day and 4 times at night. This wasn't optional, it was mandated by religious law. The priests served gods, and in order to do so, they had to be pure, both physically and spiritually. They shaved their bodies, washed with water from sacred lakes, and wore linen, symbolizing purity. The act of washing was not just ritual, it was sacred obedience. In Judaism, water played a profound role in ritual purity. The concept of tahara, or cleanliness, governed many aspects of life. The mikveh, a ritual bath made with natural, living water, was used for spiritual purification. Before prayers, after certain bodily functions, and particularly before major religious events like Yom Kippur or weddings, observant Jews would immerse themselves to return to a state of purity. Mikvehs were carefully constructed to ensure a steady supply of fresh rainwater or spring water, symbolizing divine flow. Even the utensils used for cooking had to be immersed. These were not baths for soil or sweat, but for the unseen impurities of life. Meanwhile, in Islam, cleanliness is not just encouraged, it is required. The Arabic word tahara means purification, and it is foundational to Islamic practice. Before every prayer, 5 times a day, Muslims perform wudu, a ritual ablution. This involves washing the hands, mouth, nose, face, arms, head, and feet in a specific sequence. If someone is ritually impure, such as after sexual activity or menstruation, they must perform ghusl, a full-body wash. This regular rhythm of cleansing brings not just physical refreshment, but spiritual clarity. Mosques are built with fountains or taps for ablution. The Prophet Muhammad is often quoted saying, "Cleanliness is half of faith." In Hinduism, rivers themselves are holy. The Ganges River, in particular, is believed to have descended from the heavens to purify the world. Bathing in the Ganges is said to cleanse the soul of sin and break the cycle of rebirth. Pilgrims travel for days, weeks, even months to bathe during auspicious festivals like the Kumbh Mela, where millions immerse themselves in the river's sacred flow. But ritual washing in Hinduism is not limited to rivers. Before prayers, worshippers bathe at home. Statues of deities are washed with milk, ghee, honey, and water during Abhishekam ceremonies. This act of cleaning idols parallels the cleansing of the self, removing dust from the body and ego from the soul. Turning to Christianity, the image of water is inseparable from spiritual transformation. The most prominent ritual is baptism, a symbolic washing away of sin and rebirth into a new life. In early Christianity, baptisms were full immersions in rivers or special pools, echoing the baptism of Jesus by John the Baptist in the River Jordan. In Eastern Orthodox tradition, infants are still fully immersed 3 times. In Western Christianity, the practice evolved into sprinkling or pouring water over the forehead. Regardless of method, the act is central, it marks entry into the faith. Medieval monasteries brought a more disciplined form of cleanliness. Monks and nuns, especially in Benedictine communities, washed regularly, not just for health, but as a sign of humility and discipline. Cloisters often included lavatoriums, stone sinks with running water where monks washed before meals and prayers. Clean hands reflected a clean heart. In Buddhism, ritual purification also has deep roots. In Zen monasteries, cleanliness is part of the daily meditation, sweeping floors, scrubbing floors, even washing one's bowl is done with mindful attention. In Japanese temples, visitors cleanse their hands and mouths at Temizuya basins before approaching the shrine. In Shinto, the indigenous religion of Japan, purity is central. Worshippers perform misogi, a ritual purification under waterfalls or with ladles of water poured over the body. This is not just to clean dirt, but to wash away impurity and align oneself with the sacred natural world. Even touching a shrine requires washing first. Cleanliness and the divine are inseparable. Traveling to Africa, we find traditions such as the use of cleansing herbs, clay, and smoke in spiritual rituals. In Yoruba and other West African religions, water and herbs are used by priests to cleanse a space, an object, or a person before ritual. This might involve washing with specially prepared waters, thought to remove curses, illness, or bad energy. In Native American traditions, purification often involved sweat lodges, enclosed domes where hot stones were used to create steam. Participants sat in darkness, prayed, and sweat out impurities. It was both a physical detox and a spiritual renewal, often used before vision quests or major ceremonies. Across all these traditions, one thread remains constant: cleanliness was never just physical. Whether washing with cold spring water, standing beneath a waterfall, dipping into sacred rivers, or scrubbing the skin before prayer, the goal was not only to remove grime, but to prepare the soul. Even in secular societies, echoes of these ideas remain. Washing hands before meals, dressing in clean clothes for worship, or even feeling refreshed after a shower, these are distant descendants of rituals long practiced in temples and shrines. It's worth noting that spiritual washing often existed even when water was scarce. In the deserts of Arabia, when water could not be spared, Muslims performed tayammum, a ritual purification using clean dust or sand. The act itself mattered more than the medium. It was about intention, submission, and sacred rhythm. In medieval Europe, when public bathhouses were shuttered during outbreaks of plague or under religious pressure, ritual washing sometimes replaced physical bathing altogether. Some believed that cleansing the soul would protect the body, a belief both comforting and tragic in its implications. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine holding a bar of soap. It's smooth, cool, and fragrant. A single squeeze of water and it slips from your hands, trailing bubbles that feel like they've always been part of your daily life. But this unassuming bar hides a history of innovation, experimentation, and even controversy. The story of soap is a story of alchemy, trade, and transformation. Let's start in the cradle of civilization, Mesopotamia. As early as 2800 BCE, the Sumerians, living between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, recorded a curious process on clay tablets, the boiling of animal fats with wood ash. This produced a gelatinous substance used not primarily for personal hygiene, but for cleaning wool and preparing textiles. It wasn't soap as we know it, but it was an early step toward it, a chemical reaction called saponification, though they wouldn't have used that term. From Mesopotamia, we follow the trail westward to ancient Egypt, where washing was more than ritual. It was woven into medicine and daily grooming. The Ebers Papyrus, a medical text from around 1550 BCE, describes using animal and plant oils mixed with alkaline salts to create cleansing pastes. Egyptians used these to treat skin conditions, reduce odors, and prepare the body for spiritual rites. Soap was not mass-produced, but it was valued. The body was sacred, and cleanliness was divine. Meanwhile, in Babylonia, actual bars of soap were likely being made for practical use. Archaeologists have uncovered evidence of soap-like substances from this region that were quite effective at cleaning both skin and fabric. These were mixtures of potassium carbonate from wood ash and animal fats, much like the earliest Sumerian recipes. Now we float into the sunlit courts of ancient Rome, where public baths were central to life. And yet, the Romans themselves weren't initially fond of soap for washing the body. They preferred a different method, after bathing, they'd coat themselves in oil, usually olive oil, and scrape it off with a strigil, removing dirt and sweat. But as Rome expanded its territories, it absorbed soap-making techniques from the Gauls and Germans, who had their own recipes involving animal tallow and plant ashes. Roman historian Pliny the Elder even mentioned soap, sapo, in his Natural History, noting that it was invented by the Gauls and used to dye hair red, not to cleanse it. How curious, to use soap for vanity before hygiene. The Celts, however, had developed soap as a practical cleanser. They made solid soap using goat fat and the ashes of birch or beechwood. Their bars were rough, utilitarian, and effective. This knowledge filtered into Roman culture slowly, especially as the empire's wealth and cities grew. As Rome declined, so too did organized hygiene. The early medieval period in Europe saw a retreat from frequent bathing, partly due to shifting religious values, economic collapse, and the degradation of urban infrastructure. But soap didn't disappear. In Byzantium, where Roman traditions lingered, soap production continued in small quantities. Some monasteries, especially Benedictine ones, preserved the art of soap-making, seeing cleanliness as part of monastic discipline. These soaps were made in small batches, usually unscented and rustic. But the real flowering of soap came further south, in the Islamic world. In cities like Aleppo, Nablus, and Fez, soap-making became a highly developed art by the 8th century. Aleppo soap, in particular, was prized for its quality and ingredients: olive oil, laurel oil, water, and lye. These bars were made through a cold process, then cut into cubes and left to age for months, often turning golden on the outside and remaining green within. The Islamic world valued cleanliness deeply, and innovations in chemistry, led by figures like Al-Razi, helped refine the soap-making process. Soap was used daily in baths, for ritual purification, and even traded along commercial routes to Europe. As the Crusades brought Europeans into contact with the East, soap came back to the West with renewed interest. By the 12th century, cities like Marseille, Savona, and Castile began producing their own soaps using the models seen in Syria and North Africa. These Castile soaps, made from pure olive oil, were white, mild, and luxurious. They became the standard in Europe for centuries. Marseille soap, or Savon de Marseille, became so esteemed that Louis XIV issued regulations governing its production, demanding purity and banning the use of animal fats. Only olive oil, sea water, and alkaline ashes were allowed. These soaps were fragrant, long-lasting, and increasingly available to the wealthy. Still, for much of medieval and early modern Europe, soap was a luxury item. Peasants often washed with ashes and water or used simple herbal decoctions. Soap was bought by the upper classes, who used it not just for bodies but for washing lace, silks, and table linens. The Industrial Revolution changed everything. By the late 18th and early 19th centuries, advances in chemistry allowed soap production to scale. One of the turning points was the discovery of how to produce sodium carbonate, soda ash, synthetically. This eliminated the need to gather ashes from forests and enabled larger-scale soap-making. Chemists like Nicolas Leblanc and Michel-Eugène Chevreul helped transform soap from alchemy to industry. Chevreul, in particular, uncovered the chemistry of fats and their transformation into soap and glycerin. His work paved the way for modern formulations. Factories in England, France, and Germany began producing bars by the ton. Soap became more affordable, more consistent, and more fragranced. In Victorian England, it was tied to morality. Cleanliness is next to godliness became a cultural ideal. Soap even entered politics. The British government, concerned with public health during industrial urbanization, promoted soap and personal hygiene. Companies like Pears Soap ran famous ads promising to civilize through cleanliness, an attitude steeped in imperialist ideology. Soap's ingredients also diversified. While early bars relied on tallow and olive oil, 19th-century soapmakers experimented with palm oil, coconut oil, and eventually petroleum byproducts. By the early 20th century, soap had become a daily essential. Brands like Ivory, Dove, and Lifebuoy dominated shelves, offering creamy, perfumed, or antiseptic options. Soap was no longer luxury. It was identity, fashion, even aspiration. Wartime needs brought further innovation. During World War I and II, shortages of fats led chemists to develop synthetic detergents. These were not true soaps, but they cleaned effectively and worked better in hard water. By the mid-20th century, they were everywhere, from dishwashing liquids to laundry powders. And so, soap, born in ancient clay pots and temple vats, became liquid, foaming, and mass-produced. Today, we often don't think about it. We lather our hands, rinse, and go on with our lives. But every bar of soap connects us to millennia of history, of fire and fat, of ritual and refinement. The next time you use a bar of soap, take a moment to consider its journey. From Babylonian scribes to Parisian chemists, from Roman bathhouses to your bathroom sink, soap has quietly followed humanity's march through time. A companion to cleanliness. A silent partner in health. A humble guardian at the boundary between filth and freshness. If you've ever stood in front of a shelf of perfumes or deodorants in a modern store, you've likely appreciated just how important the sense of smell is to our hygiene rituals today. We see scent as part of cleanliness. But in the medieval world, particularly during the later Middle Ages, scent was not merely a luxury or aesthetic choice. It was a critical part of the belief system surrounding health, morality, and the unseen dangers of the world. In a time when regular bathing was complicated and cleanliness had no single definition, scent became a powerful substitute. Imagine yourself inside a noble's private chamber. The air is dense with the fragrance of rosewater, lavender, and spikenard. Dried herbs hang in bundles near the windows. The linens are perfumed, and a carved wooden pomander, filled with clove and nutmeg, swings gently from a lady's girdle. These were not random additions to the decor. These were daily defenses against disease, discomfort, and, of course, the ever-present issue of body odor. In this segment, we'll explore the surprisingly rich world of medieval perfumes, powders, deodorants, and hygiene rituals that focused not on water, but on smell. For the medieval mindset, foul odors were not only unpleasant, they were dangerous. The miasma theory, which held that disease was spread through corrupted or bad air, was widely accepted. A bad smell didn't just mean someone was unclean, it was believed to be a harbinger or even a cause of illness. This theory would dominate medical thinking well into the 17th century, reinforcing the importance of masking or transforming unpleasant bodily odors. In noble courts, especially in places like France and Italy, perfumed products became a mark of distinction. Perfumed gloves, for instance, were soaked in floral waters and dried with care, giving wearers a pleasing scent that lingered. Leather was often scented to cover the smell of tanning agents. Hair powders, usually made from crushed flowers, roots, or spices, were applied not only for fragrance but to absorb excess oils from rarely washed hair. The ingredients themselves tell a fascinating story of global trade. Musk from Asia, ambergris from the digestive tracts of sperm whales, and frankincense from the Arabian Peninsula found their way into the courts of Europe. Even myrrh and sandalwood made appearances, carried along slow trade routes and carefully blended by apothecaries. But it wasn't only the upper classes who employed scent. Common people, though with less access to exotic ingredients, still took measures. A pouch of dried herbs, often rosemary, sage, or thyme, could be worn or tucked into one's clothing. These were locally grown, accessible, and part of the daily rhythm of staying fresh in a world without showers. Deodorants, in a rudimentary form, also existed. Powders made from alum or vinegar solutions were used under the arms or on feet. Ashes, chalk, and even fine clay could be used to absorb sweat and reduce unpleasant smells. Interestingly, soap itself, when available, often had a pungent scent due to its ingredients, animal fats, lye, and sometimes wood ash. To make soap more tolerable, people would add herbs or rosewater when possible. In wealthier households, scented soaps became common, particularly from regions like Castile in Spain, which exported high-quality, olive oil-based soaps across Europe. The religious angle is also important to mention. While excessive attention to bodily vanity was sometimes frowned upon in monastic circles, even monks and nuns would use rosewater for washing their hands and face or freshening up their living spaces. Scent was not viewed as inherently sinful, especially when it was tied to health and modesty, rather than seduction. There were even social cues associated with certain smells. A person who carried the scent of expensive resins or florals signaled refinement, wealth, and good moral character. Conversely, someone who stank of sweat, animals, or rot might be seen not only as physically unclean, but spiritually suspect. Over time, particularly after the Black Death, Europe saw a proliferation of aromatic hygiene practices. Streets were sprinkled with scented water. Hospitals burned incense or herbs to purify the air. Doctors wore masks filled with sweet-smelling materials when treating patients. These were all part of the larger strategy of managing cleanliness in a world where water couldn't always be trusted, and where scent held both spiritual and medical power. As we close this segment, imagine the world not in terms of sights or sounds, but smells. The warm sweetness of clove. The sharpness of vinegar. The musk of worn wool robes. The floral lift of a sprig of lavender tucked beneath a pillow. These quiet, persistent elements carried medieval people through days without baths, offering dignity, relief, and sometimes even hope. And now, let's move from personal hygiene and scent to the broader environment that shaped it. In our modern world, we often take clean water for granted. With a turn of the tap, water flows, clear, cold, and safe. But in the medieval period, the story of water was far more complex. And it's in this story that we begin to understand why bathing, despite its known comforts and benefits, became a rare event for so many people. To truly understand medieval attitudes toward cleanliness, we must first explore the deep, often uneasy relationship people had with their water sources. Bathing, after all, was not just a matter of choice or convenience, it was shaped by availability, beliefs, and above all, fear. In towns and villages across medieval Europe, water came from a variety of sources: wells, rivers, springs, cisterns, and rain barrels. But not all sources were equal, and not all were safe. Wells, often hand-dug and lined with stone, were the lifeblood of communities. In many villages, a central well served as the communal gathering place, with buckets lowered and raised throughout the day. But as villages grew and livestock were kept closer to homes, these wells could easily become contaminated. Animal waste, human refuse, or nearby burial sites could all leach into the groundwater, bringing illness. Rivers, though more abundant, presented their own problems. While people often bathed or washed clothes in rivers, they also used them to dispose of chamber pots, animal carcasses, and other waste. The same water that offered cleansing could also deliver disease. Springs and mountain streams were considered purer, especially those in more remote areas. Monasteries and noble estates were often built near such sources, allowing for cleaner water to be channeled through rudimentary aqueducts or wooden pipes. But this was a luxury, not a norm. Even in cities, where water infrastructure developed, problems arose. Take London, for example. By the late Middle Ages, the city had a system of conduits, channels that brought spring water into public fountains or cisterns. But these systems were often neglected, and pollution from nearby industries, tanneries, butchers, dyers regularly compromised the supply. Against this backdrop of unreliable and often dangerous water, medieval people developed a cautious approach to bathing. Clean water was too precious to waste on full-body immersion. And when it was used, it had to be heated with firewood, a task requiring both labor and fuel, which many people couldn't afford to spare. But beyond practical limitations, fear also shaped behavior. The connection between water and illness was keenly felt, even if the exact mechanisms weren't understood. People noticed patterns. When water from a certain well was used, more people fell ill. When someone bathed too soon after exertion or during cold weather, they became sick. These observations weren't unfounded. In fact, sudden temperature changes, poor drying methods, or exposure to cold damp air after a bath could exacerbate existing health problems. In winter, a wet head could mean chills. In spring, when diseases like dysentery surged, a plunge into questionable water could mean more harm than good. Medical writings of the time also cautioned against excessive bathing. Physicians, drawing from classical sources like Galen and Avicenna, argued that the skin was porous. Bathing could open those pores, making the body vulnerable to bad airs, miasmas, as they were called, that carried disease. Thus, instead of promoting health, full-body baths could, according to this thinking, allow illness to seep in. This fear intensified after the Black Death in the 14th century. As cities reeled from plague and officials scrambled for explanations, public bathhouses, once widespread, came under suspicion. Shared baths were seen as places of infection, where bodies mingled and germs, though not yet understood as such, found easy hosts. Combined with moral fears about promiscuity in bathhouses, many establishments were closed or fell out of favor. Even in homes, the act of bathing became ritualized and restricted. A warm cloth to the face. A scented rag to the armpits. A foot bath once a week. These routines were safer, more private, and easier to manage with limited water. Full-body immersion was reserved for special occasions, illnesses, or the very wealthy. There were, of course, exceptions. Monasteries, ever concerned with order and ritual, maintained more consistent bathing habits. Some required weekly bathing, though not always for all members. And nobles with access to cleaner water and more servants could enjoy wooden tubs and heated baths, often with herbs or oils. But even then, frequency was modest. A few times a month was considered sufficient, sometimes even generous. It's also worth noting that water for drinking was often treated with suspicion too. Instead of trusting unknown sources, people turned to ale, mead, or watered-down wine. Beverages made with boiled water or fermented to a point that killed off harmful bacteria. In essence, brewing and winemaking became tools of hygiene. And so, in a world where water was unpredictable, sometimes scarce, and often feared, it's no wonder that bathing was not a daily habit. Rather than washing away filth with risky water, people layered on scent, changed linens, or performed dry rubs with cloths and powders. By understanding the fear of contamination and the realities of the medieval water supply, we get a clearer view into the choices people made. These were not people indifferent to cleanliness. They were people navigating a world where every bucket of water came with a question mark, and every bath carried a risk. And now, in our next segment, we'll leave the realm of fear and move toward ingenuity by exploring the inventive ways medieval people kept their clothes, their bedding, and even their tools clean, without relying on regular baths. Would you like to proceed to segment 13? ChatGPT. Con. ChatGPT. Here is segment 13 of your calming, detailed script for Why Didn't Medieval People Take Baths for Months? Written in the same gentle, immersive tone for your channel boring history for sleep stories. Segment 13, Dry Cleaning the Middle Ages, How People Kept Clean Without Baths. Approx 13,000 plus characters. As strange as it may seem to us today, medieval people did not simply accept filth or live in perpetual grime. Even in a world where full-body bathing was rare, the desire for cleanliness remained. Instead of water and soap, many relied on clever alternatives, ways to stay presentable, fragrant, and healthy through other, often dry, means. To begin with, we must consider the importance of linen. Linen was the secret weapon of medieval hygiene. Unlike wool, which absorbed moisture and odors, linen breathed. It was soft, absorbent, and relatively easy to clean when compared to the heavy outer garments worn over it. Both men and women wore undergarments made of linen, shirts, chemises, or smocks, that served as a protective layer between the body and the outer clothes. These underlayers were close-fitting, worn directly against the skin, and most crucially, they were washed regularly. As strange as it may seem to us today, medieval people did not simply accept filth or live in perpetual grime. Even in a world where full-body bathing was rare, the desire for cleanliness remained. Instead of water and soap, many relied on clever alternatives, ways to stay presentable, fragrant, and healthy through other, often dry, means. To begin with, we must consider the importance of linen. Linen was the secret weapon of medieval hygiene. Unlike wool, which absorbed moisture and odors, linen breathed. It was soft, absorbent, and relatively easy to clean when compared to the heavy outer garments worn over it. Both men and women wore undergarments made of linen, shirts, chemises, or smocks, that served as a protective layer between the body and the outer clothes. These underlayers were close-fitting, worn directly against the skin, and most crucially, they were washed regularly. How regularly? That depended on one's wealth, of course. But even in poorer households, linen garments might be scrubbed weekly or fortnightly. The logic was simple: instead of washing the entire body, one could simply change the garments that touched the skin. In noble or well-off households, a fresh linen shift each morning was not unheard of. Monasteries, too, were strict about laundry, especially for inner garments. This habit of changing and laundering underclothes allowed people to feel fresher, even when full-body bathing was infrequent. Laundry, of course, came with its own challenges. Washing meant hauling water, heating it, and scrubbing fabric on wooden boards or stones. Soap was used, but it wasn't the kind we know today. Often, it was made from animal fats and ashes, and it was coarse, pungent, and best reserved for durable fabrics like linen. Clothes were then hung out to dry, ideally in the sun, which acted as a natural disinfectant. In winter, they might be dried by the fire or in cold breezes. It was laborious work, but it was routine. Another key method of staying clean was the use of dry washing, rubbing the body with cloths or even certain types of powder. People would take a soft linen rag, sometimes scented with herbs, and wipe down their face, hands, neck, and armpits. These cloths were refreshed with lavender water or rose oil when available, offering both a cleaning and deodorizing effect. In some cases, people used powders made from chalk, crushed herbs, or ground iris root to absorb oils from the skin or hair. This was especially useful for noble women and courtiers, who needed to look presentable for long periods without the benefit of a bath. Hair, too, was managed with care. Although it wasn't washed as often as today, people used combs frequently. The fine-toothed comb was a staple in every household, used to remove lice and dirt and to stimulate the scalp. Oils like rosemary or bay were sometimes rubbed into the hair to freshen it or mask odors. In addition to personal grooming, attention was given to scent and fragrance. For those who could afford them, herbs were everything. Bundles of sweet-smelling herbs were worn around the neck, tucked into sleeves, or pinned to garments. Lavender, rosemary, sage, and thyme were popular choices. These herbs didn't just cover body odor, they were believed to ward off bad airs and illness, too. Citrus peels, cloves, and perfumed waters added another layer of aroma. In especially rich households, servants were tasked with preparing scented gloves, fragrant pomanders, or perfumed handkerchiefs. The goal wasn't just aesthetic, it was also medicinal. A pleasant scent was seen as a protective barrier between the individual and the dangerous miasmas believed to carry disease. Let's not forget the social rituals around cleanliness either. In many homes, especially among the gentry, a wash basin and a jug for pouring water were common furnishings. These were used every morning and evening to wash the face and hands. Soap might be employed, particularly soft, scented soap imported from Spain or Italy, or just warm water and a clean cloth. Meals were also preceded by hand washing, often publicly. In castles and manors, it was customary for a servant to bring a bowl and towel before and after meals, allowing guests to wash their hands. This wasn't just about manners, it was a reflection of hygiene expectations, even in a time without regular baths. For the sick or infirm, sponge baths were another common solution. A cloth soaked in warm herbal water might be used to clean the body in sections, an arm one day, the back the next. Such routines were often guided by physicians or caretakers and were especially common in monasteries or hospitals. And while public bathhouses declined after the Black Death, private bathing rituals continued among the wealthy. Tubs made of wood, lined with cloth or straw, were filled with warm water. Sometimes perfumed, and the person would sit or lie inside, assisted by servants. These baths were not daily affairs, but they were moments of luxury and healing. Even in towns, steam baths persisted here and there. In places influenced by Islamic or Byzantine traditions, like parts of southern Europe, the hammam continued to provide regular cleansing rituals, blending water, steam, and exfoliation in communal spaces. One of the most fascinating elements of medieval dry hygiene was the ritualistic aspect of purification. Cleanliness was not only physical but symbolic. Washing before prayer, fasting after indulgence, and the concept of spiritual purity all reinforced the importance of self-care, even if it didn't involve a tub of water. So, when we imagine a medieval peasant or a 14th-century noble, it would be misleading to think of them as simply dirty or careless. They were, in fact, observant, resourceful, and often surprisingly meticulous. They simply adapted to their environment. An environment where water could be scarce, heating it was a task, and the risks of a bath sometimes outweighed the benefits. Their approach was layered: linen for the body, herbs for scent, cloth for the skin, and powders for freshness. It was a world of strategic hygiene, one that kept them as clean as their time, tools, and beliefs allowed. In the following segment, we'll turn our attention to how bathing customs slowly evolved once again, especially in the early modern period, and what forces finally brought daily baths back into fashion. As we slowly close the final chapter of this long and winding journey through centuries of scent, sanitation, and skepticism, we find ourselves approaching a world that finally feels familiar. A world in which the bath is no longer an object of fear or an act of luxury, but a quiet part of ordinary life. It did not happen all at once. Rather, it was a gradual process. Shaped by countless hands and minds, by shifting beliefs, foreign encounters, technological advancements, and a desire for comfort that transcended time. From the ancient Romans who built aqueducts and marble baths, to the cautious medieval monks who scrubbed themselves with cloth and piety, to the powdered wigs of Versailles and the lace-trimmed washing basins of Georgian England, each era, in its own way, brought humanity a little closer to the bath we know today. Let's pause here, just for a moment, and gently reflect. In the 19th century, the Industrial Revolution began to change the world not just in terms of machines and steam, but also in terms of how people lived, worked, and cleaned. For the first time, indoor plumbing became a possibility, not just for palaces or noble manors, but for a slowly growing middle class. Water could now be heated in stoves, piped through homes, and drained away efficiently. The invention of the modern water heater, the widespread use of cast-iron bathtubs, and the development of sewer systems in major cities all made it easier to clean not only one's hands and face, but one's entire body, frequently, and in private. No longer did a bath require servants, heavy kettles, or public exposure. It could be taken in silence, in solitude, behind a door that closed. With this came a transformation, not only in hygiene but in psychology. The bath became a ritual of comfort, of privacy, of self-care. It's a striking shift when you consider that for centuries, people feared what we now seek for relaxation. The idea of sitting still in warm water, letting the stress of the day drift away, was once foreign, sometimes forbidden. Now, for many of us, it's a symbol of home. By the late 1800s, soap had become commercialized. The rise of brands like Pears in England and Lever Brothers, who would eventually become Unilever, introduced perfumed, packaged soaps to the mass market. These advertisements didn't just sell cleanliness, they sold morality, beauty, and health. Cleanliness was equated with decency. A good citizen, it was said, kept a clean home and a clean body. Public health campaigns followed. Cities invested in sanitation infrastructure, underground sewers, clean water pipes, street cleaning crews, and public fountains. Schools taught children to wash their hands. Hospitals emphasized sterile conditions. Germ theory, once controversial, gained ground, and with it, a whole new understanding of disease prevention through cleanliness. In some places, public baths were reintroduced, not because people didn't bathe at home, but because many still couldn't afford to. Urban centers built communal bathhouses, offering hot water and soap for a few pennies. It was a moment of dignity for the working poor, a way to feel human again after long factory shifts and smoky tenements. But it wasn't only about health. Cleanliness became symbolic. A representation of modernity, of aspiration, and of one's place in society. To be clean was to be respectable, employable, desirable. And yet, even as these ideals spread, they carried with them expectations and pressures that earlier societies never knew. In medieval times, no one judged you for not bathing, because no one did. But in the 20th century, especially in the West, daily hygiene became not just a habit but a moral standard. To smell was to fail. By the mid-20th century, daily showers and evening baths were not only common but culturally ingrained. Bathroom design became a matter of taste. Towels were color-matched. Soaps came in seasonal scents. Entire industries emerged around lotions, shampoos, and bath bombs. In many homes, the bath became a sanctuary. A place of warmth, of privacy, of silence. And now, here you are, perhaps lying in bed, listening, as this soft story unfolds around you. Perhaps your room is quiet, the lights dimmed, the hum of the modern world softened by the comforting knowledge that you have a warm bath or shower waiting when you choose. It's a small thing, but a powerful one. Because in that simple act, drawing water, stepping in, letting go, we carry with us a story that spans millennia. A story of how humans, across centuries, made peace with their own bodies, their own smells, their own sense of care. A story of water, once feared, now embraced. A story of slow transformations, of soap and steam and time. So the next time you step into a warm bath, or feel the steady stream of a shower on your shoulders, perhaps you'll remember the journey. Not just yours, but ours. From the ash pits of medieval manors, to the perfumed basins of Versailles, to the tiled baths of Victorian homes, each has played a quiet role in bringing us here. To this moment. To this ease. To this comfort. And as you drift into sleep, let this be your final thought. Even the simplest routines, like bathing, are shaped by great tides of history, culture, and courage. You are part of a long human story. One that flows, like water, endlessly forward. Sleep well.